1716, and in this very room there stands an old man. Beside him is a huge stack of books. As a sacrifice to heavenly truth, I destroy these books. Edmund Halley, usurer, Isaac Newton, vagabond, thief. Now, this old man is none other than the Reverend John Flamsteed, and he's destroying books containing his own work, and he's cursing two eminent scientists of his day, Isaac Newton, Edmund Halley. Why? I hear you all ask. Why indeed? I'm glad you're asking that question. In order to find out the answer, we must travel even further back through time. Ladies and gentlemen, the year is now 1675, and the world has a problem, that of longitude. Now, at this time, ship's captains already know how to find their latitude, and their position of latitude at sea will tell them how far north or south on the planet they've sailed, but they have no accurate method by which they can measure their longitude. They're never certain as to how far east or west they've sailed once they've lost sight of land. And in this year, 1675, there arrives at the court of King Charles II, and there's a beautiful portrait of him up there to the left of his brother James. There arrives at his court a Frenchman by the name of Saint-Pierre, and Monsieur Saint-Pierre has his own solution to the longitude problem and presents it to the king. Your Majesty, I have my own solution to the problem of the finding of the longitude. Using my method, all your ship's captain has to do is observe two stars, a twinkle, a twinkle. He must then decide on which side of the sun's meridian that they lie. He must then make a note of the height of the moon. That's the height of the moon, by the way. The height of the moon. Then, armed with this information, he goes to my chart, he finds the two twinkle twinkles, he finds the moon, and voila! He has discovered his longitude. Now, Monsieur Saint-Pierre hoped to acquire a huge reward for coming up with this solution, and the king was engrossed. Yes, very well done, Monsieur Saint-Pierre. Very well done indeed. Well, I now require that our leading scientific minds of the day report back to me on the practicability of this method. Now, it just so happened that one of the leading scientific minds of the day was that of none other than the Reverend John Flamsteed, who now before your very eyes I shall become. Your Majesty, this method in theory is a good one, but unless I am very much mistaken, this method was first presented to the King of France some 40 years ago by a man by the name of Morin, and unless I am very much mistaken indeed, Your Majesty, at that time this method was dismissed as being utterly impracticable. Now, wasn't it, Monsieur Saint-Pierre? He had just exposed the Frenchman as a confidence trickster, and Monsieur Saint-Pierre stormed from the court, never to return. Flamsteed continued. However, Your Majesty, if this method were to work, it would require years upon years upon years of painstaking observations of the heavens, and for this information to be recorded in a giant star catalogue. In this way, the method could just work. The king was riveted. Yes, very well done, Mr. Flamsteed. We cannot deny any help that the heavens may provide for our seafarers. So I am appointing you, Reverend Flamsteed, I am appointing you our very first Astronomer Royal, and I hereby decree by royal warrant that you create for us this star catalogue. And I also decree that in Greenwich, at the highest point of my hunting ground there, that someone should build you an observatory. Yes, a royal observatory, in order to the finding of the longitude of places at sea, for perfecting of astronomy and navigation. I hereby hand over the job of design and the plot of land to our very own Christopher Wren. However, the building of the new observatory was not to be a grand affair because the royal warrant had provided only £500 to cover the entire cost. And therefore, this building was constructed in the main using second-hand materials. And the bricks were brought here from Tilbury, where they were constructing a new fortress, and they managed to commandeer as many spare bricks as they could possibly find. The iron and lead came from an old gatehouse that had just been demolished at the Tower of London, and the foundations of this building are the same foundations of an old watchtower that was on the site previously. When it was completed, the grand total cost came to £520, 9 shillings and 1 penny, which of course was £20, 9 shillings and 1 penny over budget. That sort of thing doesn't happen these days, does it? No. Now this meant that our royal astronomer John Flamsteed, newly appointed by the king himself no less, had no money with which to buy any instruments. He had to make them himself. He had to beg, borrow and steal them from fellow scientists in order to equip the new observatory. And to this end, he was aided by a close friend who became his patron, a man by the name of Jonas Moore. Now, Flamsteed decided, if I am to create this star catalogue, I must first be certain as to whether or not the Earth revolves at a constant rate. And I must also ascertain as to whether or not its axis moves. Now, to discover this, I will need the use of 2 incredibly accurate timekeepers. Now, these 2 incredibly accurate timekeepers were bought for John Flamsteed by his patron, Jonas Moore, from the then greatest clockmaker the world knew, a man by the name of Thomas Tompion. And the 2 Tompion clocks were installed here in the Octagon Room in 1675. And just to the left of the doorway there, you can have a closer look when we finish, just to the left of the doorway are 2 replicas of the Tompion clocks, and I'll explain why they're replicas very shortly. But originally, behind the wooden panelling there, these clocks had 13-foot-long pendulums, and they only needed winding once a year. And on the 28th of September, 1676, John Flamsteed rewound the Tompion clocks for the very first time and declared, "Greenwich Mean Time is in operation." Ooh. But as Greenwich Mean Time passed, John Flamsteed's anger and bitterness would begin to grow. To begin with, in 1679, his patron Jonas Moore died, and the Royal Society, for whom Moore had worked for many years, suddenly decided that every piece of equipment that Jonas Moore had supplied to John Flamsteed belonged to them. And they entered this building, they stripped it of virtually everything, leaving next to nothing with which John Flamsteed could attempt to complete his mammoth task. And this caused Flamsteed to fume. "From this day forward, my work and the results of my work I see as my own. They do not belong to the country because the king pays me some miserly pittance of a salary. They belong to me, and I will publish my findings when I see fit, and not before." Now, during his time so far at the Royal Observatory, John Flamsteed had been supplying information to none other than Isaac Newton. Crucial information on the movement of the moon in order that Newton could formulate his laws of gravity. Now, Isaac Newton was receiving no more information from the Royal Observatory, and Isaac Newton argued, "Flamsteed, you are a public servant, nothing more. You are here to help us discover the solution to the longitude problem. Nothing more. Publish your findings now. Don't wait until this star catalogue is completed." Flamsteed refused. Then, whether it was by accident or by design, a copy of John Flamsteed's findings found their way into the hands of the Royal Society, of which Isaac Newton was now the chair. And then, without Flamsteed's permission, Isaac Newton published those findings. And John Flamsteed was beside himself with rage.
They have published